Welcome back, everyone. Today is Thursday, October 29th. The election is now just 5 days away. 5 days to go until November 3rd. If you have not voted yet, of course, Tuesday, November 3rd is your day. I'll be voting on that day, and more videos are to come. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is just looking solely at Trump's path, potentially, to victory here. And then tomorrow we'll be doing a video covering Biden's path to victory. And then when it comes time for Tuesday in the wee hours of the morning, like I said in my last few videos, I will be doing an entire election thoughts and opinions, looking at all the paths, all the variables, all the factors here, why it might swing one way or another. We're going to be doing all of this, so if you're not subscribed yet, be sure that you are subscribed. Hit that big red button. Also hit that notification bell as well. That way you're notified every single time I do make a new video. You're not going to miss a beat. The election is just right around the corner. But in this sequence of two videos, so today Trump and tomorrow Biden, we're just going to be looking at the electoral map. We're not going to be looking at all the other factors such as social issues, the economy. We're going to be covering all of that on Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning is when we'll be doing that. So in these videos specifically, we're just going to be looking and playing around with the interactive map. We're going to be changing some states from blue to red, red to blue, and just seeing what the paths are here and how either candidate could squeeze out a victory. Now, if you are excited for the election, as an American, I'm sure everyone is, and the entire world is frankly watching, no matter what country you're living in, I'm sure you are hyped to see what's going to happen. So let's do a quick poll. Go ahead down below in the comments, Trump or Biden, regardless of whether or not who you're voting for, just who do you think will actually win? Who are you more confident in for a victory? Let us know down below in the comment section. And also, if you have been enjoying my videos and you are excited to see more updates on this election, go ahead and give the video a big thumbs up. Smash the like button. Just give the video a big thumbs up. It'll just help with that YouTube algorithm. YouTube will push the video out to even more people. That way everyone will be in the know. It'll be mutually beneficial for everyone. Everyone has to be privy to what's going on. Very important as citizens that we exercise our right to vote. And so go ahead and click the like button. I would greatly appreciate it. And we're going to be as unbiased and impartial as possible in these election videos. In this video today, I'm wearing red for Trump, Republican, and then tomorrow's video I'll be wearing blue, Biden, Democrat. So that way, you know, no bias. And we're just going to be solely looking at the electoral map. I have it on my screen here. We're going to be playing around with it, giving you the facts, no sugarcoating. So what is the Trump campaign strategy this election season? Well, essentially they're trying to replicate the 2016 map as best as possible. And they're also trying to potentially snag a state or two from the Democrats that were blue in 2016 and potentially turn them red in 2020. These are tight states, very much, you can call them battleground now states, and they were blue in 2016, but by a very small margin, and the Trump campaign thinks with some influence, they could try to snag those states from the Democrats. So without further ado, we're going to be looking at the 2016 map right now. Here it is on my screen. It is the 2016 electoral map, and the election results for 2016 was 306 Trump and 232 Clinton. That was the electoral results. That was not the popular vote. Of course, as we know, Clinton did win the popular vote by a couple million votes, but we're not campaigning for the popular vote. We're campaigning for the electoral vote, whether or not you like it. Those are the rules. We know them beforehand. We've known them for a long time. No ifs, ands, or buts. That could potentially be changed in the future. Who knows? But, of course, the way America votes is electorally. You have to win the Electoral College. And just so you understand, in 2016, it was quite the electoral landslide for Trump. Trump did decisively, conclusively win the 2016 election. He could have afforded to lose a couple states. He didn't necessarily need every state that he won. He could have afforded to lose a couple of them, especially the more battleground states. He didn't necessarily need to win every state that he won in 2016, but it was also by a smaller margin, right? So if you look at the battleground states, such as Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, namely those three, they were by very small margins. Only by a percentage point or two did he actually squeeze out those states. So as a matter of fact, it was an electoral landslide, but it was still very close. And people always talk about the polls, right? Can you trust the polls? We're also going to be discussing that in the election day video. I'm going to be talking about the polls. Can you actually trust them? And here's the deal. The 2016 polls were not terribly far off. The national polling, just days before the election, and even as close as the day before and day of the election, the national average actually quite predicted the national vote quite accurately. It was rather accurate. However, the pollsters missed, the pundits missed the states of such as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the so-called Democratic strongholds they missed them, and there were undercounted Trump supporters there that were potentially shy or were not counted for in the polls, and they came out to vote in droves. We'll be discussing that more so in that video on Tuesday morning. We're just going to be looking solely at the electoral map right now and what Trump's path to victory can be. So let's dive right in. So what we have here is an interactive map, and it shows the Trump-Clinton election. And this is not Trump-Biden, this is Trump-Clinton, but we're just going to be looking at it as a reference. And this is specifically that Trump-Clinton map. There's also 270towin.com, which link will be down below in the description. They have also a potential prospective based on current polling. They have what potentially a 2020 map might look like, but I feel that it would be actually more advantageous to look at this map, and you'll see why. So let's start playing around with this map. So the Trump campaign, first of all, before we get into the battlegrounds and these swing states, we're just going to be looking at what the Trump campaign thinks that they can actually take away from the Democrats. So the Trump campaign has hopes actually for Nevada. They think that they could potentially turn Nevada red, and they think that there's some influence there, a sphere of influence from Arizona, and that Nevada could actually break red come 2020. They also believe that there's a path, we'll turn that blue right now, that there's a path for Minnesota. If you look at the Minnesota polls, it is getting tighter, almost within the margin of error on these polls, which is also important that you have to look at. And that's potentially also why the pundits and pollsters missed the Trump victory in 2016, because the margin of error was just so vast and the difference in the weighting. But we'll be talking about that more so in that video. So Trump campaign thinks that they could potentially take away Minnesota. Biden is still leading in Nevada and Minnesota according to polls just from today, let alone from the last few months. So Biden is currently leading in Minnesota and Nevada, but they think that there's potential to take away those states from the Democrats and potentially turn them red. So that's one path. If Trump could take away Minnesota and Nevada, or just one of those, but lose a couple others that he won in 2016, that's definitely a path, but it's not as likely as a more so a semblance of his 2016 map. That would likely be a scenario that it would lead him to victory. So I don't think Minnesota or Nevada is going to be where he could potentially win. Then we get into states that Trump broke red in 2016. He smashed that blue wall, as it's coined, between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that blue wall. He smashed it, and it turned red. So they picked up Wisconsin and Michigan, and according to polls, Biden is still leading on average in both of these states. However, it's very, very tight. It's getting super tight, and it's basically within the margin of error. And if you were to also look at what they're actually polling, are they polling more Democrats and Republicans, or are they actually overweighting some of the results here? So when you look at these polls, you have to also look at the margin of error, and you have to look at how many specific registered Democrats and Republicans were polled. Very important. You have to take the polls with a grain of salt to an extent. If it's a landslide, right, so obviously we're not going to be seeing in California, you're just not going to be seeing it happen. It's not going to happen. Last time we saw that was Reagan-Bush. It's just not going to happen. There were reports over the summer that potentially because of the strict draconian lockdowns in New York that the Trump campaign thinks that there's might be a path in New York, but it's never going to happen. That's a 1 in a trillion shot. I would not bet on that by any means. So if he could replicate Wisconsin and Michigan and also take Pennsylvania as well, that would be an easy path to victory. But again, like I said, he does not necessarily need all those states. However, there is a problem here. The problem is that the Trump campaign has to already assume before looking at Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that they then scoop up states like Ohio, Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, and what used to be a Republican stronghold, Texas, could potentially swing blue this election. Some polls have Biden ahead in Texas a couple points. That could be within the margin of error. Other polls have Trump ahead in Texas by just a couple points, but it's not a guarantee. And both campaigns haven't necessarily been campaigning in Texas too much because they're too focused on the battleground states. The Trump campaign is assuming that Texas will be another Republican stronghold. Is it a surefire bet? I would say it's likely, but you can't guarantee it. Anything could happen on election day. It's also important to look at the midterms, the 2018 midterm elections. We did have not as vast as the Democrats are expecting this to come 2020, but the Democrats did have that small, quote-unquote, blue wave. They took back the House. The House is now majority Democrat, and so the Democrats are envisioning a blue wave come 2020. Also have to keep in mind, Hillary Clinton as a candidate, again, we'll be talking about this much more in depth, but Hillary Clinton as a candidate was not as favorable as someone like a Biden. If you look at the favorability ratings and the unfavorability ratings, the fact is that Biden is seen as more favorable than Clinton. Clinton was seen as corrupt, she was seen as not trustworthy, and Biden is much more favorable. But if you actually look at the enthusiasm numbers, the Trump campaign and Trump supporters are much more enthusiastic about voting for Trump himself, whereas the vote for Biden is more so a vote against Trump. But both could be just as influential. A referendum against a candidate could be just as powerful as a referendum for a candidate. So there's so many factors here and so many variables. That's why we'll be discussing it more. I'll be laying out all of my thoughts and notes come that video. Stay tuned. Back to the map. The Trump campaign is assuming that they're going to pick up Florida. I would actually bet quite a bit of money, and I do have money on this election, by the way. I actually placed a bet back in February. Put $100 on Trump. I did. I will say it. I put $100 on Trump in February. That was before the pandemic. It was before the virus really came to fruition. And so do I regret that bet? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I truly can't give you a prediction right now. It is just so tight, so unpredictable. But I'll be saying why perhaps Trump might have a bit more of an advantage come this Tuesday. And I'll be telling you all of that. So Trump campaign is assuming Florida will be a victory. If Trump were to lose Florida, it could potentially be a disaster. Of course, if Trump were to lose Texas, that would be a disaster. All you have to do is just turn Texas blue. If you were to keep everything else the same exact way, but if you turn Texas blue, look at it now, it's 270 to 268. Trump would lose by 2 electoral votes. That's how crazy this election could be if they just lose one state such as Texas. But we're just going to assume that it's a Republican stronghold, and that's the Republican bulwark that we can count on. So Trump campaign is assuming Florida. They're assuming North Carolina. North Carolina, also another very tough race. I would say Trump has a better shot in North Carolina than something like a Wisconsin or Michigan. Trump is doing better in North Carolina. It would be much harder to replicate the blue wall that was smashed here. So we're going to give North Carolina, we'll assume Trump once more. But if he were to lose North Carolina, he could afford it. He would still be at 291 to 247. We'll keep that red, though. If he were to change Florida to blue, 261 to 277, Trump could still win without Florida. Trump is doing better in Florida, I think, with the atmosphere of the restrictions and the lax view of the virus in Florida. That could potentially help Trump. But if you were to give something away like Michigan, Trump could afford that. He would be 290 to 248. Let's say the blue wall is capped and you were to give Wisconsin also to the Democrats, then you would also be seeing 280 to 258. Trump could still win without Wisconsin, Michigan. So that's what the deal here is that Trump could actually afford to lose 2 of these states here. So if you were to then give Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin to Clinton, or rather Biden, Clinton lost, Trump cannot afford that. So he would need to win at least one of these 3 states here in order to have a path to victory. So if you were to give Pennsylvania back to Trump, that's 280. Let's say you were to make Michigan red, which is very much potentially could be the case. Michigan is looking a lot better for Trump than Wisconsin. I would say Trump has a better shot at Michigan than Wisconsin. Trump's at 276 there against 262. So that's definitely a path right there. Biden could potentially pick up Pennsylvania, right? Scranton Joe, Amtrak Joe, they love him there. But there could be undercounted Trump supporters there as well. They're shy Trump supporters, and potentially they don't give their exact thoughts and opinions over the phone because of deep state theory and so many different factors. But let's say that you would give Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to Biden. Then if Trump were to pick up Nevada, what would that look like? Trump would still lose 266 to 272. You would also be seeing, if we were to turn Nevada back to blue, let's say he does pick up Minnesota, though. Minnesota would actually let him win. So 270 to 268, extremely close right there. But let's say this blue wall is mended and formed once again. Trump could win with a pickup of Minnesota. So that's a path right there. Turn these back to red for now. Trump loses North Carolina. But he could still win there, 291 and 247. Let's say he also loses Georgia, which is possible. There's a lot of African-American influence there. He could afford to lose Georgia. That would put him at 275 to 263. So if you were to say that he maintains Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, but loses North Carolina, Georgia, that's possible. Definitely a possibility there. We'll turn those back red. Of course, these other southern states are much, much more likely, such as Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas. These are very much Republican strongholds all over the Midwest here. Trump could also take New Hampshire away. That's only 4 electoral votes, but that could be the difference. He nearly won New Hampshire in 2016. It is possible, but you do have that Vermont, Maine influence there, and also New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland. But it's possible. Trump could take New Hampshire. There is a lot of support there for Trump in New Hampshire. And then if he were to start giving away some of these red states, such as a Michigan, such as a Wisconsin, maybe even Pennsylvania, see, then you're getting a little bit closer to 264 to 274. He would lose. So let's assume he wins one of these states, but then Biden were to pick up, say, a North Carolina. That's how close it could be. So there's an example right there. Let's say Biden gets Wisconsin and Michigan back and Trump maintains Pennsylvania, but he loses North Carolina. Well, then that would be a tied race, and then it goes to Congress. Congress would actually decide the election, not the people. You could double check, but I believe the last time an election was decided in Congress was about 100 years ago in the 1800s. That was the last time it was actually a tie. Good news for Trump, though, is if it were to be so close like this and split right down the middle, 269, the Republicans have enough power and enough votes to actually hand Trump the victory in the House. So Trump would actually get a victory, probably, if it were to be 269. It's definitely not as possible as what these other predictions are showing, but you just never know. Now again, let's presume that Trump maintains at least one of these 3 states right here, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and then Biden actually picks up Iowa. That's still a swing state. Biden could potentially pick up Iowa. It's definitely close there, but it does so Trump just a little bit ahead in Iowa. So Trump will probably win Iowa, but if Biden were to pick that up, Trump could afford to lose that as well. So there's so many paths to victory here for Trump, but there are more paths to victory for Biden. As I mentioned, Trump has to maintain all of these Republican strongholds here in the South and the Midwest. You would have to assume that Trump was able to replicate exactly what he did down here between Texas and Florida and Georgia and North Carolina and Iowa and Ohio. You would have to assume all of these states right here, and then you start getting into the battlegrounds, and that's where you could start deciding this race. But any of the aforementioned combinations would be a Trump victory if he were to win. Of course, there are predictions that this could potentially be a total blowout either way. Some people think that Trump could actually carry more states than he did in 2016, just based on the candidate and the coronavirus and the lack of campaigning and the lack of true grassroots movement there between the Biden campaign, as he's holding very, very small events, very few, very limited, and Trump is holding these massive rallies where he's bringing out hundreds and thousands of people, even during a pandemic. His supporters are saying, I don't care if I get the virus, I want to see Trump at these events. And that's then just a percentage of the people who maybe didn't want to go to those events. So you could look at the campaign rallies. That could definitely be another factor. We'll be talking about it on Tuesday. But those are the paths here. Trump could carry more or less and still win this race. At this point in time, Clinton was only ahead by a couple percentage points nationally. Biden's lead has actually been cut in half. If you look at all the polls and add them up and do the average there, Biden's lead has been cut in half since a couple months ago. So Trump is really tightening this race, and it is narrowing. Let's hear your thoughts. What states do you think Trump will pick up? Let us know down below in the comments. If you do believe Trump will win, what states will he get? What states might potentially flip from blue to red? Let us know all your thoughts down below in the comments. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video covering the potential Biden win and, of course, more election coverage on this channel. But if you enjoyed this video, if you got value out of it, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up, smash the like button. Also, click that subscribe button. Also, that notification bell as well. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.